Welcome, everybody, to the inaugural broadcast of the Whatever, Whenever podcast. I'm your host, Josh Reeves. This is episode 1 of the brand new podcast show here that I'm starting up, where I'll be discussing, well, you heard the title, Whatever, Whenever. I'll be discussing whatever I want to talk about, and I'll be doing the show whenever I want to do it. No set time, no set day. It will be a once-a-week show. We'll be getting into all sorts of things related to entertainment and the like. I'll be getting into basically all the stuff that I'm into and talking about that with you and giving you my take. And I'm excited about doing this new show and starting a new podcast. For those of you who aren't familiar with me, and maybe this is your first time even hearing my voice or even listening to anything I've done, I actually have, this is actually the first podcast I've ever done, because I actually predate podcasts. Podcasts weren't even a thing yet. They were sort of in their infancy, but nobody really even knew what they were in large at the time when I first started my work. I'm actually came from the Shoutcast internet radio days. I've never considered myself a podcaster, even though I've kind of been lumped into that category. I've always considered myself an internet radio host, because, as I said, wasn't even podcast explosion stuff hadn't happened when I first started. But I come from the sort of the conspiracy and research background. I've hosted a show that's one of the longest continuously running conspiracy shows, if not I can't think of anybody who's been doing it as long as I have on the internet. Now, certainly there are some people out there who've been doing it on radio networks and stuff longer than I have, but strictly just as from an internet approach, I'm going into my 13th year doing that. So but because of, things like the YouTube algorithm and various other things, it's become increasingly difficult to, reach the appropriate amount of people you want to reach with that. But not only that, I've been doing it for so long. 2020 will be my 13th year on air, as far as that goes. I also have felt a little pigeonholed, and there's more to me and more to my interests than just the conspiracy stuff. And so I felt it was time to start my actual first podcast. Again, it sounds strange seeing that I've been broadcasting and doing shows and making documentary films and everything for this long, but this is actually the first proper podcast I've ever done. So again, if you're new to the podcast, this is our first show. If you're new to me and what I do, welcome. I'll give you a little rundown what we're going to be talking about here. We'll be talking about music. We'll be talking about movies. We'll be talking about fandom, geekdom, if you're into whatever that entails, stuff like Star Wars and things of that nature. Collecting. I'm a bit of a collector myself. I collect vinyl records. I collect Funko Pop figures. I started collecting those in 2014. I don't buy as many now as I used to. I started in 2014, and I've sort of tapered off on collecting over the past couple of years, just because, well, a variety of reasons. They've sort of gotten watered down. They make too many lines. I'm not interested in all the lines. But I'm really grateful I started collecting when I did back in 2014, because it enabled me to get some pieces from my collection back then that are now worth a good amount of money. So I'm glad that I started those when I did. But I don't really, I sometimes get some for Christmas and gifts and stuff like that, but I think I maybe in 2019, I think I may have bought, I don't know, a handful, maybe 4 or 5, if that, all year. But I do enjoy collecting. And I do enjoy having my collection, and I've always been somebody that's always collected stuff. Probably like many of you, I wish my family wouldn't have told me, oh no, that Star Wars crap. Well, I knew even when I was a little kid, all the Star Wars stuff was going to be worth a ton of money in the future. Even though every adult said, oh no, you're wrong. That crap will never be worth anything. Well, you see now. What else do I collect? I'm a bit of a collector. I wouldn't say I'm a hoarder. I'm not on the hoarding level by any stretch of the imagination, but I am a collector. I do enjoy collecting things, and that's always been collecting's always been a big part of my life. It's always been something I've always done. When I was a kid, of course I collected. When I was a kid, that was kind of how they did it. When they made toys and stuff, it was kind of a different thing than had been done in toys in the previous generation, where everything was just kind of made as a one-off, and one-off toys, which you can't even imagine now. But back then, it was like Stretch Armstrong. You made Stretch Armstrong. Stretch Armstrong didn't have 10 fucking friends that you had to collect along with him. It was just Stretch Armstrong, right? And then you had, when you started to have collections, He-Man, Star Wars, Transformers, and these extensive lines that encouraged you to not only get these toys to play with, but also to collect them as well. And when you're a kid, it's not like you've got, I don't know, I guess some people grow up privileged, but I think myself, probably like most of you, you didn't have necessarily a vast amount of room for all your stuff when you were a kid. You had your one little room, and that was it. But I always have enjoyed collecting things, and there's always kind of been a collector's mentality to everything that I've ever done. And again, I understand. No, I get it. There's a fine line. There absolutely is a fine line between collecting and hoarding. There absolutely is. But you have to kind of walk that line. But I've always had that collector's mentality with everything I've ever done. And I collected comic books in the 80s and up until probably about the mid 90s is when I stopped. I collected baseball cards, football cards, all kinds of sports cards. When I was a kid, that's how I made money when I was a teenager. I would go to flea markets and set up little card shops on the weekends and sell cards and signed baseballs and stuff. In the summertime, I used to set up, I'd set up a card shop outside. I used to set them up outside of my grandmother's house and put up signs and have people just, she lived like right on the highway, right off the interstate. So we'd have people pull in off the interstate and come in and buy stuff. It was crazy. It was what I did. And what else? What else have I collected through the years? Obviously, well, I even through the CD and digital revolution, I still collected vinyl throughout that time. So I've collected vinyl. Gems, minerals, and crystals. Yeah, I've got a small collection of those. I've got a small collection of signed memorabilia, records, and a few other things. My favorite piece I have is my, it's a Beretta Auto 9 replica that I assembled from 3D printed parts, which is it's a replica of the exact gun that was used by Peter Weller in the first RoboCop movie. And a couple of years ago, they had a 30th anniversary thing of RoboCop here in Dallas. I got to go to meet Peter Weller and get that signed. So that's one of my favorite collectibles. We've got a few signed records, signed memorabilia pieces as well, as far as music goes. I've got Gene Simmons' 1978 Kiss solo album with a certificate of authenticity that's signed. I've got Queen, A Night at the Opera, original 1975 Odeon pressing that's signed by Brian May and Roger Taylor. I've got probably my favorite piece in my whole collection is I have Rush's 1982 Signals record that's personally addressed and autographed to me to Josh by Neil Peart, however you want to pronounce it. I always still say Peart, even though I know that's the wrong way to say it, but you got to understand, I learned to say his name when I was 12, 13 years old, so it's always Peart to me, even though I know it's Peart. Which is really rare to get all three singers. A lot of people get Geddy and Alex, but to have it, Neil's on there too. That's probably my favorite collectible in my collection. I've got a John Popper from Blues Traveler signed harmonica that was stage played that he put in my hand, then I got him to sign it the next night. I have a Topps Jack White baseball card. Jack White from the White Stripes. That's autographed. I've got a Muse picture I got signed at Austin City Limits Festival in 2005. Got a Jason Isbell signed poster. I've got a Guster. Or the Jason Isbell's not a poster; it's a signed picture actually that I actually took of his. I don't listen to his music anymore, but I do have that. What else? I've got a Guster signed CD. What else have I? Trying to think. Being a musician as well, I'm also a musician. I play drums, guitar, bass, keyboards. So my musical instrument collection has kind of been a rotating thing throughout the years. I don't tend to really collect music instruments that much, other than just the stuff that I play. I have had a lot of instruments through the years. I've had a lot of vintage analog synthesizers, even before those got hot. I used a lot of those on my early films, and I sort of use stuff and then get rid of it when it comes to music gear. The only stuff I still have is my Ludwig Green Sparkle John Bonham drum set. I've got that, and a few guitars. I have a few things. One guitar I built. That's a Stratocaster version of Brian May from Queen's Red Special guitar. I built it, assembled it from scratch. And it's it's got almost all the same sort of stuff that his has. It's got a flame roasted mahogany neck with an ebony fretboard. It's got a chambered mahogany body. It's got the trisonic pickups wired in series instead of parallel with all the switches. It's an awesome guitar, and I built it myself. It's the only one I've ever built. It was tough. But, yeah, man, I've been, like I said, I'm not a hoarder. I don't have hoards and mounds of stuff, but I have always been a collector. And I think that also was probably what led me in the other direction with the other stuff that started me in broadcasting with the conspiracy stuff, because I've sort of been a collector of knowledge and information and stuff as well. But like I said, it goes well beyond just the conspiracy stuff. So hence the point of this new show that you're listening to right now, the Whatever Whenever podcast. And like I said, this is sort of the pilot episode, inaugural episode. I will have a proper intro and some other things. We're also going to be trying to bring some guests on. So music, movies, comedy. I don't watch a lot of TV, so what few shows I do watch, I'll talk about. And I'm very much into the UFC, so we'll be talking about MMA and that kind of stuff here as well for you on the show. And I'm excited about this. I'm excited to get into all this stuff. So since it's a new year, today is January 1st, 2020. And we're going to kind of have a slow rollout of the show. It'll be a once-a-week show. And as I said, in the future, I hope to bring you guests, interviews, live reports from events, stuff like that. And I'm also going to be looking for some sponsors. So if you'd like to have your company sponsor the broadcast, whether that's a corporate sponsor or whether it's, you own a hobby shop or something and you want to promote that, get some advertising time here, you can email me. We have a brand new email address for the Whatever Whenever podcast. And let me find that. I think it's whatever, whenever pod. Whatever, whenever pod at gmail.com. Whatever, whenever pod, P-O-D, at gmail.com. So if you want to contact me, you can also leave comments on the YouTube video here. But if you want to contact me about possible sponsorship, if you have so collectibles, toys, that kind of thing, anything really. But with this type of show, what I'm excited about this is it's wide open, and so there's not really any constraints on what we can advertise and we'll want to advertise here. So, whereas when you're in the conspiracy world, it's a very limited thing. It's a very niche thing. Nobody really wants to do sponsors and stuff for that kind of thing. So I am excited about this. So we're going to have different segments and you'll be able to listen and watch along. There will be a visual element here to the show where I'll put things on the screen. You'll be able to watch along with what I'm talking about. So being that it's the first show and this is the first day of 2020 and we're into the new year and out of 2019, I thought that we would start our show with a wrap up of 2019. So our first segment of the first whatever whenever podcast tonight will be MMA Corner. I've been watching mixed martial arts off and on for a lot of years. I wasn't real big into, I'm not a big sports guy. When I was a teenager, obviously I was into sports and baseball and football and all that stuff. But once I got into music, once I got into punk rock, and once I started playing guitar, all that shit was over with, So I you won't hear me talk about the NFL or Major League Baseball. The only sport you ever hear me talk about here on this show is MMA, mixed martial arts, obviously with the UFC. I first saw first time I ever saw the UFC was 1995. It started in 1993. The first time I ever saw the UFC was in 1995. I was 19 years old. And as I'm sure a lot of people that are similar age to me probably had a similar experience. I've heard a lot of people have an experience like this where, well, for me, somebody just showed up. I was 19. I had one, I think it was maybe my first apartment, one of my first places I ever had, first or second place I ever had living on my own. Had roommates and stuff. And somebody just showed up one night with a VHS tape and said, whatever you're watching right now, turn it off. You got to watch this. This is fucking crazy. This is insane. This is the craziest shit you've ever seen. And I never liked boxing. I was never a boxing fan. Obviously, when Mike Tyson was at the height of his career in the 1990s, and I mean, I can remember back then, shit we used to stop. I don't think there'll ever be anything like that again. Certainly, the UFC pay-per-views are not big. I'm telling you, when Mike, if you don't remember and you weren't around back then, when Mike Tyson would fight, the world would stop. And I mean, I'm not just talking about a small niche market of people that watch boxing like it is now. I mean, I can remember, I forget what fight it was. It was in 1995. It was in October 1995. Whoever he fought in like September, October 95. Whoever he fought around that time, which you go find out very easily. I just didn't look it up beforehand. I can remember going outside and walking through the apartment complex I lived at the time. And literally you could see, I mean, every single person had that fight on. It was unbelievable. But I was never a big boxing guy. I used to watch I just could never get into it. It just always seemed really long and boring to me. And then somebody comes over, I think it was Ken Shamrock and Hoist Gracie, I believe was who the fight was between. But it was the fucking Wild West back then. I actually think the UFC is better now than it ever has been. And some people would argue with that. Some people say it's not as good as it used to be. I didn't like, kind of got into kind of a WWE thing for a short period of time. You had like Brock Lesnar in there, who I can't stand. And the guy was juiced to the gills anyway. and the whole with Ronda Rousey stuff. I didn't like I wasn't into the Ronda Rousey era. But when I got to tell you that first, I think it might have even been UFC 1 or 2 that I saw. I can't remember which one it was. It wasn't the one where the Gracie won, though. It was the one where Ken Shamrock won. So it might have been 2 or 3. I can't remember. But I remember back then it was just wild because there wasn't, I mean, at least now there's some semblance of rules to the thing. You know, they've instituted rules and it's a little closer to boxing and more traditional martial arts than it was when it first started. But it was, back then there was no like weight classes. You know, now when you have a fight, you know, if a person fights, they fight. If they win, they win. If they lose, they lose. That's it. Back then, there was no weight classes. There were basically no rules. And you just went in and fought until you lost. So you might have one guy who's fought 6 times in one night. It's unbelievable. That's insane. You would just go and you would just beat asses till you got your ass beat. Till it got down to the final ones. It was nuts. I remember seeing a big fucking fat sumo guy fighting some little skinny dude. I mean, it was just the Wild West. And I didn't really see much more of it. Saw a little off and on years after that. Didn't really pay much attention to it. Got into the 2000s and I watched a little bit here and there, some, and got back into it. I'll be honest with you, this is so hilarious. I don't even know what, sometimes you do things in life and you don't even know, when you look back, you're like, why did I do that? You know what I mean? I guess it's just you're at different mindsets and stuff. I got to be honest with you. This is so fucking funny. This is so hilarious. I can't even believe I'm admitting this. Not that I mind. It's just, I just thinking how ridiculous I was and why I did. I don't know why. I guess sometimes you're afraid of being judged. You know how that is. Everybody has that. I'm sure you've all had that at some point in your life, you know, especially when you're younger. You know, it's always easy. It seems easier these days. I don't know. Maybe it's getting older, but I think probably everybody's had those times in life where you're like kind of afraid to admit that you like something for being judged by your friends or family or whoever for liking it, whether it be, you know, a band. But I've also always had the attitude is like I hate the people, oh, what's your guilty pleasure? Well, I don't have guilty pleasures. I don't believe in guilty pleasures. I don't believe that's a thing. You either like something or you don't like something. If you like something, you know, let your freak flag fly. Let it fly. Be proud about it. But I have to admit, because I was such a non-sports guy for so long and had kind of built up my reputation, I got to admit, I was kind of in the closet UFC fan for a lot of years. I was keeping up and watching UFC stuff and keeping up with the sport and not talking about it to anybody or telling anybody I was into it. Can you believe that? I look back on it now and go, why was I doing that? And the only explanation I have is I guess I was just, I don't know. I guess I thought people would make fun of me for it. You know, I don't know. So it's only been over the past year or so that I've actually started admitting to people that I'm a huge, super mega fan of the UFC and keep up with it and watch all the fights. And I don't know. I guess, I mean, I'm 43 now and my give a fuck is at an all-time low. Continues to get that more every year. But I do remember also, as a teenager even, there would be stuff. You know, I remember being into certain bands and I was pretty wide open about the stuff I was into, but there were still certain things. That's why I think it's hilarious now. The passage of time, it's funny what happens with the passage of time where, I mean, I've been a Rush fan my whole life, and people don't get it now because Rush is just accepted. They weren't even played on classic rock radio back in the 90s. Not at all. Now they're an accepted part of the genre. And you can have a Rush sticker on your car and wear a Rush shirt and proudly, and nobody really blinks an eye. Man, and you listen, for those of you that didn't pay, that weren't there in the not so salad days like I was, you're welcome. It was tough. It was tough being a Rush fan in the 90s, dude. Got to tell you. And that was my heyday of being a Rush fan. That's when I saw him the most. When the first time I saw him in the early 90s on the Roll the Bones tour all the way through. But it was tough. It was tough. I mean, there were certain bands. Queen, I was always a Queen fan. And I had, in high school, I had Queen t-shirts, and I had pictures of Queen on my notebook and stuff. I always got called a fag and everything else. Just, simply just for your, can you imagine that? Can you even imagine? I mean, that would be a hate crime now. Where's my hate crime residuals at? I mean, listen, I never took a beating because nobody ever would have ever beat my ass. If they would have come at me, they would have got fucking put in a rear naked choke. I'd have fucked them up. But, I mean, it's crazy to think that there was a time in life where you could be chastised for being a fan. For being a fan of something. So that's really what I wanted to make this podcast be all about. It's all about fandom and letting your fan flag fly, man, and proudly proclaiming your love for the things that you're into, and hopefully allowing you, the audience, to do that as well. Maybe one of you will hear this and say, hey, you know what? Yeah, he's right. Fuck that. Maybe it's Star Wars for you. I know some people like that. I've known people like that. They're into Star Wars, but their significant other isn't, and in fact hates it, and they have to almost like they're cheating on their spouse or something. They've got to sneak away to go talk Star Wars with their friends. I've seen it, man. I have seen it. It's unbelievable. And that's a deeper conversation we won't get into, but listen, live and learn. I have experience of those things where, when you're younger, especially, you want so much to be accepted by your peers, by your friends, by, a love interest even. Everybody's probably done this a little bit to a certain extent, where you put yourself in a position where you minimize your fandom or you minimize your love for something just because the person that you happen to be with doesn't like that. And you're so, you're just so, you want to, I see people, I'm not going to name names. I still see people do it. I still see adults do it. And it cracks me up. Grown men and women who are in their 30s and 40s, come on, motherfucker. You like that band just because your fucking woman doesn't like it. And I bring it up or made a post about it on Facebook and you won't touch it because you don't want your significant other to know you're a fan of this group or something because you're ashamed of it. I see it, man. People still do it. I get it, but I don't get it when people do it when you're teens, early 20s, okay. You're still doing it in your 30s and 40s, you got a problem. But I think that everybody at some point, and that's how a lot of people fall off from being fans of things. Because you'll be into something and you'll fall off being a fan, then you'll get back into it years later and you'll be like, why did I fall off? Why wasn't I a fan for long? And then you either don't want to admit or don't remember the reason why. And oftentimes it's because, you met a girl or a guy you were into and, you asked them, oh, hey, what are you into? What do you like? You like these? You like that? And maybe at one point they said, oh, no, I can't stand Marvel movies. And you love Marvel movies. You fucking love them. You watch every single one of them. And this new person that you really, really like doesn't like that. And so you come, you're like, well, and then you start hiding it. And I got to tell you, as silly as it sounds, if you've never experienced this, it can make you grow to resent that person. You got to be really careful. I speak from experience. Believe me, I've done it. And I won't do it again, but I've done it. But it sucks, man. Where you're like, you know, you imagine being this one's not uncommon. Although I have a pretty high success rate for converting women into fans of Rush, but man, I gotta tell you, a lot of women don't like Rush. And that's tough. If you're a Rush fan, dude, and you want to throw on a Rush album, you know, you hadn't listened to it in a while, but you can't really do that because your girlfriend or wife or whoever's not into it, it sucks. So my point is that I want to encourage people to embrace their fandom. And I want you to feel like, if you're listening to this show, that whatever you're into, and whether it's something that a lot of people are into or aren't, I want you to feel like you don't have to be ashamed to be what you're into here, okay? If you're here on the Whatever Whenever podcast and you're hanging out here and you're listening to this show, you are welcome, and you're welcome to engage in your fandom and express your fandom and be proud of it. You don't have to hide. You may have to hide everywhere else in life, but this is your safe space for your fandom and whatever you're into. Everybody's into different stuff. I think that's great. I think it's awesome. You might be into stuff I'm not into, and I might not be into stuff you're not into. That's why I'm not going to spend time on this show being negative about the things that I don't like. This is not going to be a show where I rant against the things that I don't like or not into. Because again, everybody likes what they like and everybody doesn't like what they don't like. So I'm going to, on this show, focus more on the positive and talk about what I do like. Because you can talk all day about what you don't like. That's boring. So here on the Whatever Whenever podcast, I just want everybody, you can freely express your fandom here. Let your freak flag fly. Don't forget, fan is short for fanatic. People forget that because fanatic sounds like something crazier than just a fan, but that's where the word fan comes from. And I want you all to be able to embrace the fanatic in you. Because when I get into something, I go full tilt boogie, baby. I don't just dip my toe in the water or something. I always tell people the worst thing and the best thing that you can hope for is having me as your fan. Because if I'm your fan, I'm going deep. I'm not just going to dip my toe in it. But yeah, I do have to admit that here in the UFC corner segment here, I do have to admit there was a time for a long time where I was kind of in the closet as a UFC fan because I didn't want people to judge me on it. I know, it's silly. But now I don't care. And I got to tell you, 2019 was an amazing year for the UFC, both in terms of the growth and more events this year than any other year. And so I thought I would give you a little bit. There were so many great events this year, even right up until the past couple of weeks with UFC 245. Trying to think what the highlights for me. Well, lots of highlights. Fighter of the year, who I think is fighter of the year. Oh, I guess, I think the consensus would probably be Jorge Masvidal. And I think I'd probably go with that. I think Jorge Masvidal's probably fighter of the year. The guy's been in it for so long, and he never really made any waves until this year with those key wins against Ben Askren, where he got the fastest knockout in UFC history. That was on my birthday, by the way. Oh, That was the best ever. And then, of course, the BMF title belt match against Nate Diaz, which was great. Another favorite of the year for me is another up-and-coming fighter, one of my favorite fighters, fighting right out of Dallas, Texas, where I live. Jeff Hands of Steel Neal had that great knockout of Mike Perry within 90 seconds of the first round at UFC 245. Knockout of the year, I think it would be. I don't think it's hard to pick the Masvidal Ben Askren. Listen, Ben Askren talked a lot of shit. Go back and watch those videos, man. Jorge Masvidal. I mean, he could talk shit if he needs to, but he's not. He's not by and large a shit talking kind of guy. But if you talk shit to him, he's going to talk it right back. And Ben Askren, who was a traditional wrestler, he was an Olympian wrestler. Talked a lot of unnecessary bullshit, and he got dealt with. I mean, they call it the 5-second knockout. It was a 3-second knockout. You could watch it. He was out before he hit the fucking canvas. He was out. And then he got him with more shots to the head. And they asked him, did you think those shots to the head were necessary? And he said, yeah, they were super necessary. And so after the fight was over, when they were doing the press conference stuff, they asked Jorge Masvidal, well, now that you beat Ben Askren with the fastest knockout in UFC history, are you going to squash the beef? Is the beef squashed between you two? And his response was just so classic. His response was, oh, no, it's not over for Ben. If I see that dude at Whole Foods, I'm going to still slap that dude up. So I think pretty much anybody would say that was knockout of the year. But I actually think it was a tie. Valentina Shevchenko, who is my favorite fighter in the UFC, female or male, she's my number one favorite. I love Valentina Shevchenko. Her head kick knockout at UFC 238. I don't think there's been a more brutal head kick knockout than that. It was so fast and so clean and just right on the money. I mean, unbelievable. I think had Masvidal not got the 5-second knockout against Ben Askren, that we would be talking about the Shevchenko knockout head kick at 238 as being the knockout of the year. So I'm going to give it a tie. I'm going to call it a tie. So a lot of people probably would disagree with that. But suck it, I'm a Shevchenko fan, so I'm giving the knockout of the year 2019 to a two-way tie between Jorge Masvidal and Valentina Shevchenko. And I think my runner-ups for knockout of the year would be also both of which took place recently, actually. My runner-ups knockouts happened at 245 a couple of weeks ago. Obviously, I mentioned Jeff Hands of Steel Neal, fighting out of Dallas. Love that guy. I hope to be able to interview Jeff Neal and have him on the show for you here in the future. So stay tuned for that. His knockout of Mike Perry, 90 seconds. It was unbelievable. It was just, I scared the shit out of my cat. I was watching it live. I screamed. I've never done that before. I screamed and yelled. My cat took off running. It scared him. It was just so unexpected and so powerful. I've never had an emotional reaction like that. I freaked out, man. That 90-second knockout. And also, I gotta give credit to Kamaru Usman too, the Nigerian Nightmare. He might be from Nigeria, born in Nigeria, but he fights out of right here in Dallas, Texas too. So we've got some up and comers here in Dallas, man. The fight world is getting some. Dallas is really coming up in the fight world. The rest of our sports franchises suck fucking goose shit through a straw, but our MMA fighters are having some success. So runner-up, knockout for me would be Jeff Neal's knockout of Mike Perry in 90 seconds. And also Irene Aldana's knockout. I went back and watched that fight, the Irene Aldana fight from 245, the second time. It's interesting when you watch a fight live, you experience it in a completely different way than you experience it when you watch it a second time. And you notice and pick up on things that you sometimes don't notice the first go around. And one of the things that I noticed with that Irene Aldana fight at 245 was, yeah, she won the match. And yeah, she knocked that poor Brazilian girl out and put her to sleep. I mean, she literally went to sleep on the mat. But what I've noticed when I watch it back the second time is she was not winning that fight. And that's one of the interesting things about the sport to me, is that you can be losing. You know, if it's a 3-round fight, you can be losing and be getting your ass whipped all 3 rounds and have the possibility of losing to a decision. And boom, one punch, you can knock somebody out and win. That's what happened to Irene Aldana. She didn't really, honestly, I love her. She's a great fighter. Fights out of Mexico. I think I've watched her literally fight her way up from the bottom, and she's going to the top now. But when I watched it a second time, she took some damage in that fight. Had it come down to a decision, she would have lost that fight. But she knocked her opponent out, won the fight. And that's interesting because I've seen a lot of fights like this. It's got to be the only sport in existence where you can win and get fucked up worse than your opponent. I've seen it happen multiple times. Who was that guy? Sean O'Malley? Sugar Sean O'Malley a couple of years ago. He kicked a guy in the head or something. And, shattered his entire leg. His entire fucking leg was broken. When the fight was over and it came down to the decision, he's laying on the fucking mat being attended to by medical personnel. You know, normally they're standing up. Bruce Buffer comes out, announces them, and whoever wins, they raise their arm up, right? Sugar Sean O'Malley was on the mat with a broken leg. He couldn't even stand there when they gave the decision. And when they announced the decision and announced that he won, it was probably the only time in UFC history where the person who won didn't have their arm raised. Because he couldn't stand up. He was on the ground with a broken leg, and he won. That post-fight interview, if you've never seen it, it's probably one of the best ever. He's just like, he's a young guy. He's a cool kid, man. I like that kid, Sugar Sean O'Malley. He's coming up. He's got a fight coming up, too. And fought in a while, but he's laying there on the mat, and Joe Rogan, he'll do the post-fight interviews, and Joe Rogan just gets down on a knee and sticks the microphone in the guy's mouth as he's laying there being attended to by medical personnel with a broken leg. And you could tell the guy's, obviously he's got a broken leg. He just was in a cage fight, and he's sitting there, I'm just grateful to everybody. I love this sport. I love my family. I fucking love you, Joe Rogan. And Joe Rogan just says, I fucking love you too, buddy. It's the only sport where you can win and be hurt worse than the person that you beat. It's insanity. I remember when Brendan Schaub fought Mirko Cro Cop back in 2011. Mirko Cro Cop was one of the most feared heavyweights in the game. The guy was a pure murderer. That fight between him and Brendan was a slugfest. They slugged out. He destroyed Brendan's lip. He had to have 12 stitches. Completely busted his lip open. He hit him with a fucking elbow in the nose. Shattered Schaub's nose in 18 places. Had to have reconstructive surgery on his nose following the fight. But he caught Cro Cop with a fucking blast on the chin, and that was all she wrote. He beat Mirko Cro Cop with a fucking knockout, but he had to have facial reconstructive surgery on his mouth and on his nose. That's the craziest thing to me about the sport is that you can win, but you can still lose. It's crazy. But as far as the best finish of the year, yeah, I think best finish of the year has got to go to Thug Nasty. Bryce Mitchell, another young up-and-coming fighter. This guy's hilarious. He's from Arkansas. He's just a fucking total redneck hillbilly. Hey, man, Reebok need to get me them camouflage shorts. He finished this guy with a twister, which is a jiu-jitsu move. It's like the most painful. It basically just twists everything. There was only ever one person that ever finished somebody in the entire UFC history with that twister move, and that was the Korean Zombie. Yes, that's a real fighter name. Yes, that's his real name. That's his actual name. He had his actual name changed that. The Korean Zombie. Yes, that's his name. And a few weeks ago in D.C. Fight Night, Thug Nasty Bryce Mitchell finished his competitor with only the second ever twister in UFC history. So he's another up-and-coming fighter. So this year was, not all the fights are great. I watch them all. I even watch listen, if you watch UFC and you don't watch the prelims and the early prelims, you're missing out. I got to say, as far as entertainment goes, to me, it's the best bang for the buck. Better than concerts, better than movies. And when you look at the cost, versus what you get, I mean, when you count the prelims and early prelims, some of these events are 6-7 hours long. So hopefully, I've never actually ever been to a live one. I'm hoping that it's going to change here in 2020. I'm hearing that there's supposed to be an as yet unannounced possible UFC event in April or May at Jerry World, Cowboy Stadium, AT&T Stadium in Arlington. Nothing's been confirmed or announced yet, but that's the rumor around the campfire. I'm hoping that happens. And then UFC 247 is coming up in February in Houston. And I really want to go that. If anybody out there has hookups or connections with tickets or can get me, press access or anything like that for UFC 247 in Houston, please contact me. Please let me know. And again, my new email address is whenever pod@gmail.com. So that's another thing I hope to do here in the future is to be able to interview some various MMA fighters, go to some various events, do live reporting and whatnot from these events, and bring you coverage of that in the future. Our next segment tonight, my favorite TV shows of 2019. Short list. I don't watch a lot of TV. Most of what I do watch, I'm sure, is probably very similar to what you guys do now, which most everybody does, which is to watch stuff on the streaming platforms and Netflix and all the rest of that. So this won't take very long. Favorite TV shows? I think my favorite TV show this year, it's tough. I think TV show of the year for me was Mayans MC, which was the spinoff of Sons of Anarchy. They've got 2 seasons out, and they just renewed for a third. If you've liked Sons of Anarchy, I actually, in some ways, think Mayans MC is actually better. It doesn't have as much of some of the things that were, some of the stuff they did with the musical stuff towards the end of the episodes, or I don't know. Listen, don't get me wrong. Sons of Anarchy was a great show. I watched it. It was great. It's one of the best shows ever, but Mayans MC is really, really good. If you slept on that or didn't think it was going to be good or didn't watch it, I highly suggest you watch Mayans MC. Get both seasons and watch them. Really, really fucking amazing. Great writing. Just great performances, great acting. Fantastic acting. Well above par for television acting in that show. So that would probably be my number one pick. Number two, Black Jesus. Love Black Jesus. Watched Black Jesus from the very first episode. And then Charlie Murphy passed away before season 3. And we didn't know if we were going to get a season 3. It's been a few years. And then finally in 2019, we were given season 3. And before season 3 even finished airing, we had the death of another series regular from Black Jesus, John Witherspoon. Rest in peace, Pops. And, season 3 had been so highly anticipated. Everybody was so excited when it came back. And I think it was the best season of the 3. I really missed Charlie Murphy being in it. I didn't really think the show could continue without Charlie Murphy in it, to be honest with you, because he was such a pivotal part of the first 2 seasons. And so I was a little skeptical at first, and it actually turned out to be really good. But now with the passing of John Witherspoon, I don't know. I don't know how they're going to do a 4th season. Black Jesus was created by the guy who created the Boondocks cartoon and the guy that created the Trailer Park Boys, Mike Clantenberg. But God, season 3 of Black Jesus was so good. It kept getting good, better and better as the episodes went along. But seeing as that will now be viewed as the penultimate, the swan song for John Witherspoon, man, it was great. It really was. For that to be his, it does make you sad when you watch it. You're like, man, that guy could have kept going for many more years. But season 3 of Black Jesus definitely was fantastic. Another show that I watched from the very beginning, Mike Judge's Silicon Valley, saw the end of its run in 2019 with its final season. I gotta admit, the show was real hot and cold throughout its run. The first season was phenomenal. The first season was spectacular. And then you had, some problems with the cast, internal problems and stuff. I still watch every episode. I watched every episode of every season. Some episodes were better than others. It was kind of a frustrating show sometimes in terms of you just be frustrated. You think it would be getting somewhere, and then it would, take 2 steps forward and then take 10 steps back. But I have to say, the final season actually ended up being great, and I love the way they ended it. And I saw a bunch of dummies online. I didn't like that last episode. I didn't get it. I wanted to see them win. I wanted to see them be a success, and the whole thing was just them failing. Well, you didn't. You're a dummy, and you obviously didn't get what the show was about at all. Because if you actually paid attention to that final episode, their whole Pied Piper thing that they'd been working on, it actually was a success. It was too much of a success. It worked so good, they had to shut it down. I called it the Tron 2 ending is what I called it, to be honest with you. I thought it was kind of a Tron 2 ending to me. I was like, nobody else noticed that, but I was like, they kind of ripped off that ending from Tron 2, because in Tron 2, that was, he was trying to build, Flynn was trying to build the perfect system. But what he didn't know when he set out to create the perfect system was that perfection isn't knowable, because sometimes even when you create perfection then can become the enemy. So he created this perfect system, and then it starts trying to, wipe out stuff and go into the real world and become destructive because it's too perfect. That was the same thing that happened with the Pied Piper thing in Silicon Valley. They had created such an amazing operating system that it was starting to go out and go after other systems. So they had to shut it down in order to basically keep the end of the world from happening. But no, I thought there's some fantastic performances in that. I'm a Mike Judge super fan. I like, I watch everything he does, no matter what. I think the biggest sleeper, probably the most unexpected sleeper show for me that was unexpectedly great, that I didn't really have too high of expectations for, but was pleasantly surprised at how good it was, had to be The Mandalorian. And wow. I'm going to go as far. A lot of people aren't going to like this. I'm going to go as far as to say that it was the only truly great thing that's been done with the Star Wars license since the first 3 original trilogy movies. Seriously. And Jon Favreau, if they hadn't given that motherfucker billions of dollars, Disney, you need to nut up and give Jon Favreau $5 billion of the hundreds of billions that you make. Because that guy has saved your ass twice. Fucking Favreau, man. Can you imagine that? You ever would have thought, you would have told me back in the 90s that Favreau would save Marvel and Star Wars? I would have laughed at you. Remember watching him in PCU when I was in high school? Can you blow me where the Pampers is? Remember PCU? God, that movie told the future, didn't it? Jeremy Piven, Jon Favreau. I love that movie. One of my all-time favorite movies. That movie predicted the future. Good God, did it ever? Remember David Spade was in a secret society in that movie. It was supposed to be like Skull and Bones. It was called Balls and Shaft. No, really. It's that good. The Mandalorian it was really good. I liked it because even if you were never a Star Wars fan, even if you've never watched anything Star Wars, you could sit down and watch that series and enjoy it. And whether or not you knew anything about anything that's ever happened in the Star Wars universe before, it wouldn't matter. And it's almost done like an almost kind of like a, gunslinger, spaghetti western almost type of thing. I really enjoyed it. I thought the guest appearances in it were great. So many big name guest appearances throughout the series. Who would ever thought Nick Nolte would voice a Star Wars character and be great at it? And so many other guest appearances in there. The Mandalorian, I got to tell you, I give it 5 stars. I give it 10 stars. Not every episode is great front to back, but as a series, as a whole, and they've got renewed for season 2, which will be coming in fall of this year, 2020. I have to say, by far, definitely the best thing that Disney has done with its control of Star Wars, by far. Podcasts. All right, podcasts. Let's get into podcasts. That's the next section of our show. I don't listen to a lot of podcasts. I really don't. The only things I really listen to most of the time are for information resource or reference research purposes. People always ask me, "Oh, what other shows can you suggest? What other shows should I be listening to that are like yours?" I can't give you one suggestion. I can't. The only podcasts I really listen to now are I listen to comedy podcasts and stuff. I really like This Past Weekend with comedian Theo Vaughn. He does a show twice a week, though, Mondays and on Thursdays. The Monday show, I would skip. It's just a solo show. He doesn't have guests or anything. And I can't watch it anymore. I watched it a few times. It's almost, and he's admitted that he's a recovering, cocaine addict, but I don't know if recovery is necessarily the word. Most of the time he's on that show, he just sounds like the ramblings of a fucking cokehead to me. But when he does his second show of the week, when he has a guest, an interview, has a guest come on, those are fantastic. And the reason they're fantastic is because Theo's kind of an unorthodox type of comedian. And a lot of people don't get his comedy. And when people don't get his comedy and you see him interact with him, it can almost seem like he's bombing, like he's not doing good, when actually he's killing it. Because it's just the kind of comedy he does. But he's had some crazy, wild people, out of left field guests. And it always turns out to be pure gold. I mean, he had, what was her name? The one that got accused of killing her roommate in Italy. What they call her? Foxy Moxie or Foxy Roxy, whatever the fuck her name was. He had her on. He's had lots of comedians on. The most awkward, worst interview I think he had was the one from 2019 with Bill Burr. Comedian Bill Burr. Because you could tell Bill Burr just didn't get his stick, doesn't get his comedy. So it was really an awkward interview, but he has lots of people from different, he's had MMA fighters on. He's had lots of comedians on, actors and stuff. The best episode he did a few weeks ago, he also does these weird episodes where he'll just interview regular people. Like he interviewed this one girl that's a sex worker. And that was just a crazy interview. He entered one, it didn't even say the name of this girl, I guess, until later in the interview, but it's just called A Blind Person. Her blind person, whatever. And he just interviewed this blind girl. And it was fantastic. But he did one a few weeks ago with a plumber. Man, you got to go check that episode out. Oh, it was hilarious. And then I was talking about Bryce Mitchell earlier, Thug Nasty. And after that fight in the comment section of the post-fight interview, everybody was calling Bryce Mitchell the UFC Theo Von. And I guess word got back to him because just like a couple weeks after that fight, he ended up having Bryce Mitchell on his show. It's kind of funny. Theo Von's from Louisiana and he's from Arkansas, so it's kind of like Battle of the Rednecks. It was hilarious. And I also watched The King and the Sting, which is a podcast. I started watching it even before it was a podcast, when it was just Theo and Brendan Schaub. It's basically just a roast show. They just basically roast each other and then roast things that that the audience sends in. It's pretty funny. I think I probably get more laughs out of that show every week than I do out of anything else. So I highly suggest King of the Sting, like that podcast. And not one that's new for 2019, but one that's been around for a while, and one that I consistently watch in the comedy front is Kill Tony with Tony Hinchcliffe. That's a great, I love that. I love the format of letting people go up and do 1 minute of stand up and then they talk about it. And I've seen Tony Hinchcliffe live a few times, seen the Kill Tony live. And actually I got to actually see him last night. That's what I did for New Year's Eve. Tony Hinchcliffe comes to Dallas every New Year's Eve for his annual show. So a friend of mine got tickets and took me last night. It was great. And Kill Tony's a great podcast. And you never know. You might see me on there in the future. I'm thinking about next time he comes to town, put my name in the bucket and see if I get pulled and do my minute up there. So if I get a chance to do that in 2020, I'll be sure to let you know. So yeah, I do like to attend. I go to a lot more comedy shows now than I used to. I used to go to more concerts. Now I go to more comedy shows. It's cheaper. It doesn't take up as much time. And unlike musicians, I mean, every comedian, if you want to, you can go and meet them after the show. It's great. So I saw a few comedy shows in 2019. And they were all great. I can't really think of one other than maybe some of the owners, the openers that aren't as good. Can't really think of one that was bad, but my favorite had to be the Joey Diaz 56 and Still Slinging Dick tour at the Majestic Theater in Dallas. That's a great. That's such a great title. Hey, what are you doing now? I'm going to the 56 and Still Slinging Dick tour. Oh, really? Have fun with that. Joey's never done. Listen, his podcasts. I used to watch his show, his podcast for a long time, but the guy, he just doesn't know how to talk on the microphone. And half the stuff he says, you can't hear what's coming out of his mouth because even though he's wearing headphones, he's been doing a show for 9 years. He still doesn't know how to talk on a fucking mic properly. I don't know what's going through his head over there, but it's annoying. And his comedy specials, stand-up specials he's done, none of them, I think Socially Unacceptable, that one was okay. But none of them have really ever captured what he's like live. And he'll admit that. But God, I wish that performance could have been captured, the one I saw in Dallas a few months ago. God, that was phenomenal. He was amazing. And I got to meet him afterwards. And I got to tell you, man, the guy, I mean, he really has, I've heard him say for years on the show, you know, that if you're, and I feel that way about my listeners and stuff too, but I think he takes it to a more extreme than I do. But I've heard him always say, you know, hey, you know, if you're a fan of mine, you're family, you know, you're part of the family. And when I met him, I could tell he recognized me because I've heard him reference some of my stuff on his show before. And I could tell he recognized me, but I put out I said, hey, Josh Reeves, and I put my hand out. And he kind of did this kind of like excited face. I said, hey, Josh Reeves, and he kind of made this excited face where his kind of eyes kind of went up and his smile lit up. And I went to shake his hand. And I put my hand out to shake his hand. And instead of shaking my hand, he opened his arms and he said, you give me a hug, big dog. We're family. And he gave me the biggest hug. And he had just the warmest, I mean, like an angel bear. That's the only way I can describe it. It really moved me. I really, just a couple of minutes, I could, you know, a minute I got to spend with a guy. Get a picture taken. Man, he really, I got to say, he puts up a front. And I've experienced this with some comics. I think Tony Hinchcliffe is very much that way too. They put up these very kind of, you know, stand-up comedies that have such a cutthroat game. And I think these guys have to put up these kind of macho fronts sometimes to hide who they are. But I got to tell you, man, Joey Diaz, that guy, man, that guy's got a big heart, man. The energy that came off that guy when he hugged me was beyond anything. I could feel the love radiating from that guy. And when you watch his podcast and his appearance and stuff, you don't get that. You think the guy, you should be scared of the guy because he really does a great job putting up the front. He's an actor, you know, putting up the front that he's this scary guy. But, man, the guy really is a big teddy bear. And I was grateful I got to meet the guy. And I just, you know, you give me a hug, big dog. We're family. It was just really cool I didn't hear him say it to anybody else. You know, I thought that was really it was really changed my perception of him, you know. So yeah, that was my favorite. Favorite concert of the year? Gosh, I didn't go to a lot of concerts in 2019. I really didn't. I went to a few, but not anything big. The biggest concert I went to of the year. And listen, I got to be honest with you. You know, there's a lot of stuff. I don't go to near as much stuff, but you know, when a friend calls you up, a lot of the stuff I got to go to in 2019 was strictly because, you know, you have a friend call you up and say, hey, I'm going to this. I don't want to go by myself. You want to go? I got a ticket for you. What are you going to do? You going to say no? Hell no. So I'm grateful, you know, I'm grateful to have friends and people who, just like, you know, I guess by nature of what I do with my other stuff, they're grateful for that. So I'm grateful to them, and I get to go to a lot of stuff that I don't have to pay to get to go to a lot of times. I'm grateful for that. But same thing, you know, I've talked about it before. People always say it's sacrilege. I've never been a big Iron Maiden fan. I was never a big Iron Maiden fan. I was never into them. But also, I'd never seen them live. So my friend's like, you want to go? I'll get you a ticket. Hey, I go, oh, yeah, let's go. And it was probably the best show I saw all year. It was unbelievable. And I was blown away that I knew every single song. I knew every single song they played, and I've never owned an Iron Maiden album in my life. That's how iconic their music is, whether you like it or don't. That's unbelievable. I've never experienced that with any other band. any other band, not even Rush or any other band I've ever been into. Their songs are so iconic, and they've become such a fabric of metal music in general that even if you've never heard one of their albums, and I probably only, I like the real early Iron Maiden. The first couple of albums were my favorite. I'm not a big Bruce Dickinson fan, but seeing that tour this year and seeing the stage setup and the sound and the presentation they had, unbelievable. There definitely wasn't a concert that I saw in 2019 that was better than that. Absolutely not. Runner-ups for me would be Immortal Technique. I saw Immortal Technique a couple of months ago. Got free tickets to that. It was amazing. And I can't believe it took this long. Well, there just hasn't been any incarnations of this band since the late 80s, but I got to see the mighty Black Flag. And that was the first tattoo I ever got when I was 18 years old. As soon as I turned 18, I went straight to the fucking tattoo parlor. On my left top arm, I got the Black Flag bars. Bitch. Because I even then I knew, even though I was 18 years old and I was into punk rock and all that stuff, and I was, in the mosh pit going to shows, I knew one day I'd be old and I wouldn't be in the mosh pit anymore. And I said, you know what? Fuck it, man. Because Black Flag was really my entryway. Hearing them at Jeff Phillips Skate Park in 1989 changed my perception of music. It changed because when I was a kid, when you understand, I grew up. I'm 43, so when I was growing up in the 80s and stuff, that was the height of hair metal and butt rock and all that stuff, sweat rock, teased up hair and spandex, and I never liked that stuff. I mean, I like Guns N' Roses, but I don't really consider Guns N' Roses part of the butt rock, hair rock scene, although a lot of people do. I consider that butt rock, hair rock scene more like Rat, Warrant, fucking Bullet Boys, all that horse shit. I couldn't relate to that music, and so I didn't really like a lot of music for a long time. But when I got into punk rock and when I heard Black Flag for the first time and I saw what those guys look like, and I realized, wait a minute, these guys look like people I hang out with. They look like normal people. And I realized, wait a minute, you can just wear your regular clothes and you don't have to be a fucking virtuoso on your instrument. And there's actually a style in music where that's encouraged, where it's just about emotion expression, and it can be angry or it can be sad or it can be dark or it can be happy, it can be whatever you want it to be, and fashion's not involved, and you don't have to have look like a cartoon character. You can just be a normal fucking regular person and play this music that's almost like street music. Man, that changed the whole game for me. That's what made me want to start playing guitar initially. And then a couple of years after that, you had, Nirvana came out, and I never wanted to be a musician or play a musician, but it was that era of music where it was just about, it wasn't about, can you play, Eruption by Van Halen? Fuck, give a fuck about a Van Halen Eruption. I can play 3 chords and I can scream with distortion. It sounds fucking good, and people fucking mosh to it. I mean, that was what made me want to be a musician. Now, it came back and bit me in the ass later when that all started to change, and I started realizing, oh, shit. All those years when it was great. I mean, I spent my early teens playing live gigs. I was playing gigs in the biggest clubs in Dallas where I'd seen my heroes. I had seen Trees. I'd seen Nirvana there, the infamous show where Kurt gets hit in the head with a guitar. I was there. I saw Smashing Pumpkins, their first tour, Soundgarden, all these bands that are legends now. I saw them in tiny clubs, and had started my own band and was playing those tiny clubs just a year to 2 years after I first saw those people playing those very same clubs. And I'm 17, 18, 19 years old. So then for me, it wasn't about the musicianship. It was just about getting a band and getting out there. And then kind of as that all started to fade away towards the late 90s and stuff, I started realizing, oh, shit. Yeah, it's great. I spent all my years playing gigs and stuff, but I should have been spending all those years getting better at my instrument. So I started changing and writing and getting more into keyboards and synthesizers and stuff for a while, and learning how to play piano and focusing more on songwriting and composition. But I saw the newly formed Black Flag with the only original member being Greg Ginn. And the guy they've got singing now, and I don't even have his name right here in front of me. You can go look it up. I used to see this guy at Jeff Phillips Skate Park in Dallas when I was 13. He was a former professional skateboarder. And I started putting together that he may have actually very well been, in fact, I'm almost certain it was him, because I had one of his skateboards and everything, that introduced me to Black Flag. He's now the singer in Black Flag. And he sounds like a cross between Keith Morris, who was the guy from the Circle Jerks, who was Black Flag's first singer, and Henry Rollins. And a lot of people go back and forth, what was the better era of Black Flag? A lot of people believe it was the pre-Rollins era, and a lot of people believe it was the post, with Rollins era. My, as being a lifelong Black Flag fan, I have to say that the best period for Black Flag is definitely pre-Henry Rollins. However, the best records that they made, the best time period for their records was, in fact, during the Rollins era. So the best period for the band definitely was before he started it. There's an album, The First 4 Years, that has all the early Black Flag stuff. I highly suggest that if you don't have that, get that if you want to hear stuff. But then you can't discount the later stuff, even though that was the better period and definitely more pure punk rock stuff. You can't discount the later stuff that they did with Rollins, like Damaged, My War. I mean, there's just a lot of great stuff in there, especially the B-side on the My War album, where they started going towards almost a more groove-based, just crazy experimentation. But I was really pleasantly shocked at how great Black Flag sounded, and I saw them at a tiny little bar and grill here in Dallas, and they were great. They were fantastic. The only thing I didn't like, the singer, it does a great job. He does a real great job, I think, he kind of sounds like almost a blend of Keith Morris and Henry Rollins. I was really shocked at how much he sounds like both of those guys put together. The only thing I didn't like was on the show TV Party, when they did that. We're going to have a TV party tonight. All right. And they name all the shows. Don't want to anything else. We don't want to know. And they name all Saturday Night Live, Dallas. And when they did that in this new version, the singer started yelling out shitty new shows instead of the old ones. Like, Big Bang Theory. Like, what Big Bang Theory? What the fuck? Westworld. I was like, fuck this, and I left. Ugh. No offense to you if you like those shows, but that's garbage. And you shouldn't be changing classic songs like that. You know what I mean? Just sing it the way it was, dude. Nothing was wrong with that. All right, that's it for my favorite live concerts of the year. Moving on now. And I'm going to move fast here towards the end. Favorite movies. My favorite movies of the year. Listen, there weren't a lot of great movies this year. I got to be honest. I'm sure I'm probably mentioning or not mentioning some that I saw that were pretty good, but favorite movies of the year for me, The Irishman, obviously. Uncut Gems. If you didn't see Uncut Gems with Sandler, you got to see that. Being a gem and mineral guy myself, and having black opals, Ethiopian black opals, yeah. Uncut Gems I thought was good. Ford versus Ferrari was good. The movie's okay, but I liked the story, and the story was one that needed to be told, and I liked that pretty good. The El Camino Breaking Bad not prequel, but I guess extension or whatever, the story of what happened to Jesse Pinkman after the end of the last episode of Breaking Bad. It wasn't as good as I expected, but it was still pretty good. Gets a good honorable mention. Avengers Endgame, if you're into the Marvel movies, was kind of the penultimate of all comic movies. It was really great. It had some great scenes in it. The one that got me, I got to say, the one that got me for comic book movies of the year, the one that got me that I didn't think would be that great, that I actually thought ended up being really great, was Spider-Man Far From Home. If you didn't see that one, put that one on your list. That's a real sleeper. That was actually way, way better than I expected it to be. And it was even a cut above a lot of the other Marvel movies they've come out with. Honorable mention for movies of the year. This is going to be a controversial one, I know, but I actually wasn't even going to go see this movie. And the only reason I did see it is because there were some copies that got leaked out on the internet. But I did see Star Wars Rise of Skywalker. I'm no J.J. Abrams fan. I've never liked anything J.J. Abrams has done outside of maybe the first season of Heroes. Maybe that's the only good thing he's ever done. Didn't like the first Star Wars movie he did. I did like the second one, the Rian Johnson one that everybody universally hated. I actually liked. So I figured I had low hopes for Rise of Skywalker. I honestly did. I wasn't excited about this movie coming out. I wasn't excited to see it. I steadfastly said I wasn't going to go pay to see it. I wasn't going to give fucking Disney my money anymore. Then a good quality copy leaked, and I said, what the hell, why not? I'll download it and watch it. And I downloaded and watched it, and it was pretty good. It wasn't great. It wasn't, knock your socks off. They should have called it, instead of the Rise of Skywalker, they should have called it the Rise of Damage Control, because that's what it was. It was a 2-hour and 15-minute exercise in trying to fix everything, every single little minutia thing that everybody griped about from the first two. I remember even complaining after the first one. Remember when they made all the good guys? Now it's like the good guys now are, oh, we got a woman. Oh, we got a black guy. Oh, we got a Puerto Rican. And then all the bad guys of the Empire were all white, and they all looked like Nazis. And I wasn't obviously I wasn't the only person that noticed that. I'm sure you noticed it too. But I thought it was hilarious in Rise of Skywalker where they're just trying to fix everything everybody griped about, right down to that thing of then mixing in and adding some multiculturalism to the bad guys. They had a black guy, they had an Indian guy, and they had a couple of women in there in the bad guys. And so, but I thought it was okay. I thought it was, I don't know it was better than the other two. But that whole series was an abortion. And even as a Star Wars fan, I mean, it never felt like it was made for us, for Star Wars fans. It just felt like it was almost like revenge. That's what I always felt like. You got to remember, a lot of people don't remember this, but you got to remember the biggest enemy of Disney for a long time. The biggest enemy to Disney was Star Wars and Lucasfilm for a long time. Disney had lost so much money and just couldn't compete for a long time while they were trying to keep up with Star Wars. And I remember when they tried to compete with Star Wars, they came out with in the late 70s, they tried to compete and they spent a big bunch of money, try to create a competing Star Wars series. And they had that movie, The Black Hole, with Anthony Perkins, which I like. I like that movie. It's still one of my favorites. But they just weren't ever successful. That's what it's kind of felt like to me. Instead of Revenge of the Sith, it's almost felt like Revenge of the Disney. Like Disney's getting their revenge for, losing money and being fucked with by Star Wars for so many years that, we're going to buy it and now ruin it just as payback. It kind of has almost seemed like that way to me. I don't know. Favorite music documentary of the year, As It Was, by Liam Gallagher. If you're an Oasis fan or were an Oasis fan, I actually think his documentary, As It Was actually better than the Oasis documentary, Supersonic, that came out a few years ago, because it's that documentary only focused on everything that happened up to Nebworth in 96, whereas This concentrates on everything that happened after the Oasis breakup, and specifically within Liam's life. So, very well made documentary. I watched it a couple of times. Highly suggest that film. Best music documentary I saw all year. All right, for our final segments of our 2019 wrap-up show and the inaugural episode of the Whatever Whenever podcast, we're ending this first inaugural show with my favorite records of 2019. Now, I want to be clear when I say records. When I say my favorite records of 2019, I mean my favorite vinyl records. And I have to put a caveat on this, that if you do not listen to these albums that I mention as my favorites on vinyl, and you listen to them strictly in a digital format, they may not sound as good to you. I cannot speak to the validity of these records in any other format other than vinyl, because I have heard some of these records in digital, and I got to tell you, they're not as good. And believe it or not, that's a thing. Believe it or not, albums can sound better to you, and you can actually enjoy albums and think an album is better. I think some of these records, had I just strictly heard them in digital, I wouldn't have liked them as much. So here we go. Favorite record 2019 for me, The Raconteurs, Help a Stranger. Great record. That one sounded pretty much the same as it does. I think it sounded just as good in digital as it did on vinyl, only because Jack White is the master of analog, and he's probably got the best analog to digital converters in the game. And but the vinyl is spectacular, that. But when I listened to it in digital, it was still pretty darn good. So The Raconteurs, Help a Stranger, that's the first record they did in 10 years. I saw that tour as well. Great record, great band, just fantastic. Jenny Lewis, On the Line. That's one where I heard on digital it doesn't sound good at all. I heard the CD was messed up. The vinyl version is spectacular. Great studio band on that, backing her up on that. Benmont Tench from the Heartbreakers. Both drummers that played on George Harrison's All Things Must Pass. Jim Keltner and Ringo Starr, both on that record. Don Was on bass. Other appearances on there by Beck and by Ryan, the Finger Blaster Raper Adams. Great, fantastic record by Jenny Lewis. I've listened to that record probably more than I listened to any other record in 2019. I just love it. I love every song of the lyrics. A couple songs I feel like she's talking directly to me, but that's neither here nor there. Flying Lotus, Flymagra. I first got into Flying Lotus back in the 2000s, back when I was watching Adult Swim, when I was watching Aqua Teen Hunger Force and C-Lab and all those shows. And they would have these weird kind of like jazzy interlude sections between the shows where they have like a black screen with white words on the screen, and they would say funny stuff on the screen, and they'd play this music behind it. That's Flying Lotus. And the album that came out in 2019, Flymagra, tons of weird guest appearance spots and stuff on there. Herbie Hancock, David Lynch, tons of people. If you want kind of a chill, I don't even know what kind of music you call Flying Lotus. It's not necessarily hip hop. It's not necessarily jazz. It's not necessarily electronica. It's not necessarily funk, but it's a little bit of all that. If you like music that's kind of, where you can't really define the genre, and you want some cool kind of chill background music, that's definitely check out that. If you don't know who Flying Lotus is, put them on your list. Flymagra, Flymagra. Liam Gallagher, As It Was, fantastic record, best stuff he's done since the Oasis days by far. The final record by the Cranberries that was put together after the death of Dolores O'Riordan, the Cranberries In the End record. I got to admit, when I opened up that gatefold cover and saw the band standing there without her, I got a little teary-eyed, I'm not going to lie to you. And Jeff Lynne's ELO from Out of Nowhere. Fantastic record. Saw that tour back in 2018. And if you like the classic ELO stuff, this sounds just as classic as anything you put out back in the 70s. So that's it. That's all, folks. that's the end of 2019. Now we're into 2020, and this is the launch of this brand new show, the Whatever Whenever podcast, and I'll be talking about fandom and on all things fandom, and hope you'll enjoy me. And I'm sorry, I hope you'll join me, not enjoy. I hope you will enjoy me. That's not what I meant to say, but I hope you'll enjoy me. That sounds dirty, doesn't it? That's not what I meant. I hope that you'll join me in the full expression of your fandom as well. Let it fly, man. Don't be ashamed of what you like. If you like something and you think, you don't want to express that because you're afraid of what your significant other or whoever might think about it, fuck them. Do you like what you like? Don't let anybody tell you any different. And that's where I'm coming from with this too. So I hope you guys enjoyed. I'm looking forward to 2020. I'm looking forward to being able to get outside of the box of just the conspiracy stuff and be able to have, do interviews, musicians, comedians, MMA fighters, actors. I hope to, in the future, have interviews and have guests from all those walks of life and from all those professions. So, and I hope to be able to, put across my fandom to you and also, give you my insight and my years of fandom and knowledge and research into all these things. So I'm excited. Thank you for joining me. Please spread the word, subscribe to our channel here, and let everybody know about the Whatever Whenever podcast. And we'll see you next time as we head into 2020, into the future. And I know there's going to be a lot of exciting things to talk about in 2020 as far as music and movies and MMA and just everything. So I'm excited to get into all of it with you here in 2020 and beyond. Thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen. We'll see you next time. Take care.